Our next speaker is Mr. Larry Rivera. Larry Rivera is the chairman of the Oswald Innocence Campaign. Rivera has given interviews about the assassination to Spanish media. He has published many articles on the assassination, has many YouTube videos covering his research. He has given presentations for the OIC, Dr. James Fester's Santa Barbara JFK Conference in 2013 on the 50th observance of the assassination, covering the topics of Buell Wesley Frazier. He also is a presenter at Trine Day and Judith Berry Baker's 2014 JFK Conference in Arlington, Texas, focusing on the DPD motorcycle officers. For Berry Baker's JFK Assassination Conference in 2016 and 17, he discussed the Doorway Man and Dealey Plaza. He has a degree in computer networking and is an expert in computer imaging technology and facial recognition using state-of-the-art digital overlays. He translated Judith Berry Baker's book, Me and Lee, into Spanish, and is the author of the JFK Horseman, Framing Lee, Altering the Elgin's Six, and Resolving Other Mysteries. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Rivera is a researcher bar none. One of the things I love about Larry's work is that he makes the complex manageable and understandable. If you haven't seen his work on the overlays, that was the thing that, to me, put him in my highest echelon of respect for researchers. I haven't heard what he's going to actually present today. I'm really looking forward to it, and I know you will too. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome for Mr. Larry Rivera, who's going to be talking about Malcolm X assassination, why it matters. And it's going to be a two-part presentation. So he'll do one part, we'll take a brief intermission, and he'll come back and do the second part. Again, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Larry Rivera.
Oops. Thank you, Don. Before I start, I'd like to do the same salutation that Malcolm X would have said, and that would be Assalamu alaikum. All right, that means peace be unto you. Now, the Malcolm X assassination is like the runt of the litter. You always have these conferences, and you get JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King. But we don't get much information on the assassination of Malcolm X, which I consider one of the greatest American tragedies that this country has ever seen. We got a lot of information here, visuals, audio, so let's get started. This case involves the following entities, and we're talking about the Nation of Islam, and I have layered them here on purpose, okay? And in the middle, in between here, you've got the NYPD, and over here you will see what was used to be known as BOSSI, Bureau of Special Services and Investigations. And underneath, obviously, the FBI and the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. The biographers that I use in this presentation, starting with Alex Haley, Eric Norden, 1967 and 1978, who had to publish in not mainstream media, and when I talk about publications that were not mainstream media, I'm talking about The Realist and Hustler magazine. So that's the name of your file. I'm sorry?
What's the name on your PowerPoint up there on the upper left?
Malcolm X 12. So Eric Norden wrote these articles that he updated in 1978 that for some reason have not been cited by many biographers, okay? And then we've got Peter Goldman in 1973, Manning Marable, who won a Pulitzer Prize for his work in 2011, and Carl Evans, who updated his book from 1992 to 2017. Carl Evans couldn't find a publisher, And a couple of video productions that are on YouTube, Omar Shabazz and even Stephen, obviously that's not a real name. And as you can see, we have what we call a Black Zapruder film, okay? And we're going to be showing that, and we're going to be breaking it down and analyzing it as well. And this is how it used to be. Malcolm and Muhammad Ali were blood brothers. Malcolm hung out with Ali in Miami before his championship fight against Sonny Liston. All right? And Ali had Ali had Malcolm X as his guest with his family. All right, and we get this wire photo that went on the wire services on newspapers. Challenger and friends, Malcolm X, leader of the Black Muslim movement in New York City, shown with his family, and the Challenger had invited them as guests, you know, of his in Miami, paid all their expenses. Now, these photos were taken at the Hampton House, and that was a motel that catered to African Americans, and that's where Malcolm X stayed in Miami. Well, guess what? After the fight, Ali put on a tuxedo, and he didn't go hang out with Angelo Dundee or Ferdy Pacheco, you know, or his Kentucky investors who were all white. He went to the Hampton Inn, and he hung out with his people, okay, and here you can see him, and here they're hamming it up just, you know, during the post-fight victory, you know, and to the delight of those present. And as you can see here, Malcolm and Ali, you know, slapping five, hanging out. Here at the top, you can see Bundini Brown, that used to be his spiritual advisor. And here Ali eating ice cream, okay? And a very interesting photo because this man here, okay, we'll be talking about Milton Henry, okay, in a couple of minutes. Malcolm and Ali, you can see them, they were together, they were good friends, they were brothers, okay? And then came the JFK assassination. And never have I seen a man in my life more afraid, more frightened than Elijah Muhammad was when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I've never in my life seen a man as frightened as he was, and when I made the statements that I did, why he almost cramped up behind it. Because there were all kinds of implications to it that at that time were way above and beyond my understanding. This Malcolm X, 6 days before his own assassination, okay, talking about Elijah Muhammad's reaction to finding out about the JFK assassination, which caused a split with the Nation of Islam. And it all had to do with chickens coming home to roost. Believe it or not, the most important Malcolm X JFK connection put in motion Malcolm's own undoing with the NOI and can be traced back to his comments after the JFK assassination. Prior to JFK's demise, Malcolm had been a harsh critic of the Kennedy administration and its apparent lackadaisical record on civil rights and what he perceived as lack of action after the assassination of Medgar Evers, the African American girls that were killed in Birmingham, Alabama, the church bombing. Okay, and he was comparing all of these assassinations and killings to chickens coming home to roost. And we're going to see how that got turned around. Now, and all he said was the following: being an old farm boy myself, chickens coming home to roost never did make me sad. They always made me glad. Now, on December the 2nd, 1963, the New York Times publishes this article, and it explains exactly what Malcolm X's reaction was to the JFK assassination. And if you read this article, you will see that nowhere is he glad or, you know, making jokes about the assassination or having, you know, celebrating, okay, the assassination, which he never did. And I'll just go right here in the article, and this also shows how Malcolm X was very informed about what was going on in the world, not just what was going on in the United States. So here he's accusing Mr. Kennedy of twiddling his thumbs at the killing of the Diem brothers in Vietnam, and he told this black Muslim rally in Manhattan that he never foresaw that the chickens would come home to roost so soon. Then also he talks about that right after the assassination, the media came to them, to the Nation of Islam. They wanted to find out what their reaction was to the assassination. And he even says it right here, that what they wanted us to say was, hooray, hooray, I'm glad he got it. Well, he never did say anything, not even close to that. All right? And in further criticism of Mr. Kennedy, the Muslim leader cited the murders of Patrice Lumumba, Congo leader, civil rights, Medgar Evers, and the girls that I just mentioned. Now, in all of these instances, he's saying all of these instances are chickens coming home to roost. Okay, so it gets turned around to this. Malcolm X, leader of the Black Muslim sect, they call it a sect, okay, has been suspended for expressing joy at the assassination of President Kennedy. Expressing joy. And then the FBI picks it up in the same theme. They pick it up in documents, and it says here, for stating that President Kennedy's death pleased him. Here's another one. For making such an ill-timed, barbaric statement regarding the death of the president. Later on, he went and explained, and this is an article that came out in the New York Times, and Malcolm contended that his phrase had been misinterpreted. He said he had meant that the spread of social hatred had created an atmosphere that made assassination possible. That's exactly what's going on today in America. So I have sound bites so that I don't have to talk so much. And this is the interpretation of the Rockefeller Commission when it convened in 1975.
We come here to echo the words of a very wise and much misunderstood man. His name was Malcolm X, and he was one of the most brilliant political observers and social analysts of our generation. After the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X observed that the act was an example of, quote, chickens coming home to roost, unquote. People didn't understand his meaning. He was criticized for his statement in both the black and the white communities. It was not long until Malcolm X also fell victim to assassins' bullet. 10 years after the death of Malcolm, we are in a better position to understand his words. We know of CIA domestic surveillance activities of infiltration and in some instances provocation. We have substantial reason to believe that CIA operatives have been involved in assassination planning abroad, if not also in actual assassinations or attempted assassinations. We have reason also to believe that domestic forces in foreign assassinations were linked, that is, that the CIA engaged in clandestine cooperative efforts with the mafia or representatives of organized crime. With all of these suspicions and revelations now becoming public knowledge, the climate is ripe for understanding Malcolm X's observation over a decade ago. By chickens coming home to roost, Malcolm was saying that a CIA who will join forces with organized crime to assassinate foreign leaders will not hesitate to do the same right here in America in the assassination of a president.
So meanwhile, as the feud between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad boiled over, Ali was forced to take sides. He chose the NOI. He terminated their friendship, brotherhood, and mercilessly denounced Malcolm in public and in the media. At the end of his years, having realized his mistake, he would reach out to Malcolm's daughters seeking redemption. Harrelson Lafayette Hunt, H.L. Hunt. Did Tetro put this in here? Oh, okay. He was at the Murchison party the night of the 21st of November, 1963. He spent the next 2 months in Mexico after the JFK assassination. His son Nelson helped pay for the Welcome Mr. Kennedy ad, which is here at the right, November 22nd, about racist, richest man in the world. Phil Nelson tells us in his book, the venomous nature of H.L. Hunt's and Clint Murchison's attitudes towards Kennedy has been proven. If not, consider Hunt's statement that there was no way to get these traitors out of our government except by shooting them out. Their financial wherewithal to finance the operation need not be documented. That is a given. Dallas old man H.L. Hunt and the Nation of Islam. H.L. Hunt was financing the Nation of Islam and had the backing of the FBI and the CIA. Before the assassination, Malcolm X called attention to this, and it was among the reasons for the rupture of relations with the group and his departure from it. Hunt's hatred of black folks and desire to see them repatriated to Africa or worse was the basis of his financial support. Carl Evans in The Judas Factor, page 402. Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X said, had been depositing contributions from his followers in a secret bank account in Switzerland. And his wife had been doing the same in accounts she held in Beirut and Cairo. Although the Nation of Islam received hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations each year, Malcolm X said, the accounting books he examined in Messenger's office revealed that the Nation of Islam was spending far more cash than followers were contributing. When Bradley and Jamal, these were Malcolm's secretaries, inquired how this was possible, Malcolm X replied, hit them like a bombshell. Quote, there is a Texas millionaire who supports not only Elijah Muhammad, but the Minutemen and the John Birch Society, Malcolm X said. His name is H.L. Hunt. I think he is in oil. And we have a very important sound here that needs to be played.
And I guess many of you have heard it said that his financial support comes from a rich man in Texas. I heard that while I was in the movement. I've heard it more since I left the movement. A rich man in Texas. You can look up, any of you can look up his name. But the FBI knows that too. But they still don't touch him. And never have I seen a man, and this rich man who lives in Texas, by the way, lives in Dallas. His headquarters in Dallas. His money is in Dallas. The same cities where President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And never have I seen a man in my life more afraid, more frightened than Elijah Muhammad was when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I've never in my life seen a man as frightened as he was. And when I made the statement that I did, why, he almost cracked up behind it, because there were all kinds of implications to it that at that time were way above and beyond my understanding.
So Hunt regarded the African Americans as a threat to Caucasian control of American politics, as he made clear in numerous radio broadcasts and interviews. During a radio broadcast in 1960, Hunt exposed his abhorrence of African American. Alfred Zoll, one of Hunt's chief ideological allies, had since 1936 advocating sending all African Americans back to Africa. Hence, it's not really surprising that he would be interested in financing the Nation of Islam. In early 1963, Hunt's commercial corporations were linked to the Anti-Semitic Liberty Lobby and the John Birch Society. Of course, the implications are mind-boggling. The Nation of Islam preached first and foremost hatred against the white devil and separation of black and white races. Establishment of black-owned and patronized businesses, schools, entertainment, banks, real estate, segregation. It boasted a youth organization called the Fruit of Islam, FOI, which groomed and trained its young members to become part of the collective. This played right into the hands of H.L. Hunt, who loved the concept and being the richest man in the world had unlimited resources to make it happen. All that was needed was someone like Elijah Robert Poole, also known as Elijah Muhammad, to do his bidding and create the facade that the organization was self-sustaining and profitable. As Omar Shabazz has observed, Muhammad owned luxury cars, buildings, apartments, businesses, had payroll that needed to be religiously met with ministers, managers, administrators, and other personnel. The newspaper business alone, Muhammad Speaks, was an enterprise which was published and distributed nationwide, and this required careful administration and coordination. These are some of the headlines and some of the articles that came out about Malcolm X being suspended by the Nation of Islam over his comments after the JFK assassination. As a result of the NOI suspension, Malcolm went on to form his own African-American Muslim organizations, the MMI Muslim Mosque Incorporated, which adopted the Orthodox Sunni version of Islam, and the OAAU, Organization of American Unity, which did not require its members to be Muslims, in the hope of galvanizing and consolidating what in his mind was a true expression of what Islamic religion should be like and how it should apply to practicing African Americans. Moreover, a Pan-African model in the Western Hemisphere is what Malcolm X was proposing, where civil rights could truly have a chance of surviving, especially in America. His hope of globalizing his dogma was supported by Islamic countries around the world, who received him as a virtual head of state when he visited several times in 1964. Malcolm X was closely monitored by the CIA during these sojourns, with the fear that his views on African American oppression and discrimination would embarrass the United States in international circles. It did. He was, in fact, the victim of several attempts on his life while traveling overseas. This concept is thoroughly explored by Eric Norden, and I will be coming back to his work, because according to Norden, the CIA was right in fearing the new Malcolm X. And that's where we get Malcolm's epiphany. In 1964, Malcolm converts to the Orthodox Sunni Islam and repudiates the NOI and its teachings of hatred. Malcom was learning about the world of Islam, but he was learning something else, that he was well known and respected throughout the world. We get that in Walter Dean Myers, By Any Means Necessary.
On April 13, 1964, Malcolm X left the United States on a personal and spiritual journey through the Middle East and West Africa. By the time he returned on May 21st, he'd visited Egypt, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Ghana, Morocco, and Algeria. In Saudi Arabia, he'd experienced what amounted to his second life-changing epiphany as he accomplished the Hajj, pilgrimage to Mecca, and discovered an authentic Islam of universal respect and brotherhood. The experience changed Malcolm's worldview. Gone was the belief in white people as exclusively evil. Gone was a call for black separatism. His voyage to Mecca helped him discover the atoning power of Islam as a means of unity as well as self-respect. In my 39 years on this earth, he would write in his autobiography, the holy city of Mecca had been the first time I had ever stood before the Creator of all and felt like a complete human being. It had been a long journey and a brief life. The Nation of Islam's Elijah Muhammad turned out to be much less than the upstanding moral paragon he pretended to be. He was a hypocritical serial womanizer who fathered numerous children out of wedlock with his secretaries, a jealous man who resented Malcolm's stardom, and a violent man who never hesitated to silence or intimidate his critics. His knowledge of Islam was also relatively slight. Imagine being a Muslim minister, a leader in Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam, Malcolm wrote, and not knowing the prayer ritual. Elijah Muhammad had never taught it. It took Malcolm's disillusionment with Muhammad and the nation finally to break away from the organization and set out on his own, literally and metaphorically, to the authentic heart of Islam.
For those who don't know, the prayer ritual, when you're practicing the religion of Islam, you have to pray 5 times a day, starting from sunup, all the way to sunset. And during these prayers, your body, your brain has to be at a lower level than your heart. That is why they bow towards Mecca the way that they do, all right? And as just noted, Nation of Islam leader Elijah Muhammad was living in hypocrisy by keeping a harem of young secretaries for his carnal enjoyment. Malcolm had been suspecting this since the mid-1950s, so it came as no surprise to him. Some of these were under 18 years old and already had babies fathered by Muhammad. According to Marable, it came to a point where the care of so many infants was becoming a problem for Muhammad and the NOI organizations. Soon, there were so many illegitimate children to take care of that new household arrangements were necessary. After the suspension, Malcolm became directly involved and made sure that the public knew about the situation and recorded news interviews. And of course, it became another source of undoing between Malcolm X and the dishonorable Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm went ahead and brought in flamboyant women's rights activist, attorney. Gladys Root to sue Elijah Muhammad over the paternity of the children. When traveling to LA, Los Angeles, to confer with Root, he would also make it a point to check in on the 2 young women and their children. And according to this FBI document dated after his death, he was planning on testifying against Elijah Muhammad in open court. Marable writes, the women had been so intimidated by the NOI that they had become frightened for their own safety. They were living together in Los Angeles, but had moved twice out of fear. When contacted by LA attorney Gladys tells Root, Malcolm encouraged her to speed up her efforts, saying, if this case doesn't get to trial soon, I won't be alive to testify. As a result of the suspension and antagonism aimed at Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, the Nation of Islam was now bereft of its best orator and attraction. Neither Elijah Muhammad nor any of his sons possessed the public persona and charisma that Malcolm carried. Malcolm was sure to attract many of Elijah Muhammad's followers, which he did, where even one of his own sons, Akbar, was said to have been in complete disagreement regarding Malcolm X's suspension and other so-called woes. Now, it must be noted, and I'm sure Mal, this is something that would be in his area, that these headlines set a distinct tone of public contention, okay, focusing on squabbles between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. These would later come in handy when moving the Nation of Islam to the top of the list of those who wanted him dead. Assassination attempts overseas, and we're gonna hear now. Everybody knows James Douglas has read his book, JFK and the Unspeakable.
The key to understanding Malcolm's assassination is the last year of his life. He spent over half of it outside the United States, on 4 separate trips abroad. In his autobiography, Malcolm tells a well-known story of his transforming April 1964 Hajj to Mecca, where he experienced a profound unity of worship with Muslims of every race, including, quote, whose hair was the blondest of blonde and whose skin was the whitest of white, unquote. The autobiography says little, however, of Malcolm's July the 9th to November the 24th, 1964 travels throughout Africa, an equally important story he was saving for a book he didn't live to write. The purpose of Malcolm's tour of Africa was to internationalize the plight of Afro-Americans in the U.S. Malcolm went first to Cairo, where he attended the African Summit Conference and appealed to the delegates of 34 African nations, quote, to help us bring our problem before the United Nations on the grounds that the United States is morally incapable of protecting the lives and the property of 22 million African Americans. Malcolm wanted to unmask the U.S. government at the United Nations. He was taken seriously in that purpose by African heads of state and by his own government. U.S. intelligence agents followed him closely, as can be seen from CIA and FBI documents. Malcolm was acutely aware of the surveillance, which was made obvious by the agents in order to intimidate him. At the Cairo conference, Malcolm collapsed with stomach pains and was rushed to a hospital. His stomach was pumped, and he survived. The doctors told him he had consumed a toxic substance at dinner. They ruled out food poisoning. Malcolm thought he had been poisoned by the same forces that were shadowing him. He then wrote an open letter to friends in Harlem in which he said, "You must realize that what I am trying to do is very dangerous because it is a direct threat to the entire international system of racist exploitation. Therefore, if I die or am killed before making it back to the States, you can rest assured that what I've already set in motion will never be stopped. Our problem has been internationalized. Malcolm X by any means necessary." Malcolm continued his human rights campaign for African Americans for 4.5 months throughout Africa, speaking before huge crowds in nation after nation, dogged everywhere by the CIA. Malcolm's friend and writer Louis Lomax wrote, "By then, the CIA was following Malcolm's every move. Agents were aboard every flight he took. Other agents watched his hotels and even kept him under surveillance during mealtime." Malcolm told his sister, Ella Collins, that he narrowly avoided another poisoning in Ethiopia.
Who was Milton Henry, who I mentioned earlier in this lecture? From his obituary, we get, no matter where or to whom, Henry was not one to capitulate to heinous acts or to tolerate abuses without striking back. That same moxie was on display later when he began defending his clients, and the keen analysis he expressed in the courtroom would also be evident as he began to become an activist in politics, education, and the general quest for human rights. Henry was a trusted comrade and a loyal member of Malcolm's organization, and this is one of the reasons he was selected to travel with him to Cairo for an international summit conference. That is very important because he is the witness who saw what the CIA did to Malcolm overseas when they tried to poison and kill him, okay? But there is evidence that the CIA did not limit its activities to surveillance. In July 1964, Malcolm was in, and this is coming from Eric Norden, who I told you I was going to quote from extensively. In July 1964, Malcolm was in Cairo to address the African Summit Conference. In his memorandum to the conference, he violently attacked Washington's domestic and foreign policy. He termed the U.S. government's espousal of civil rights legislation nothing but tricks of the century's leading neo-colonialist power, and urged the assembled delegates to bring the U.S. before the bar of world public opinion at the UN. Malcolm this was the big leagues, all right? He was really getting into some really controversial stuff that was bringing attention to the intelligence agencies, and that's why what happened to him happened. The American Embassy in Cairo engaged in delicate behind-the-scenes negotiations to have Malcolm barred from addressing the conference, but its efforts were coldly snubbed by both the Egyptian government and the conference organizers. Washington's efforts to silence Malcolm then appeared to have passed from the diplomatic to the intelligence apparatus. Their efforts came closer to success. Malcolm almost did not live to deliver his speech. When Malcolm first arrived in Cairo, he was given accommodations aboard the Isis, a resplendent pleasure yacht moored on the Nile. The Isis harbored freedom fighters from all the non-liberated areas of Africa, which included Angola, Mozambique, South Africa, Rhodesia. When the yacht became overcrowded, Malcolm moved out and took a room at the Nile Hilton, big mistake, which he shared with Milton Henry, a lawyer and civil rights activist from Detroit. This comes from Eric Norden's other article in Hustler magazine, and it goes, Black attorney and civil rights activist Milton Henry, who accompanied Malcolm in his second African trip, remembers, we were tailed everywhere we went. There was one agent especially who irritated Malcolm. We couldn't eat without him being at our next table. Malcolm himself observed on his return, throughout my trip, I was, of course, aware that I was under constant surveillance. Henry warned Malcolm that his move to internationalize the domestic racial situation by bringing up the question at the UN could invite the most terrible retaliation. In formulating this policy, Henry says today, in hitting the nerve center of America, he also signed his own death warrant. Now you're starting to see the motives for assassinating Malcolm X.
On July 23, 1964, the day before he was to deliver his speech to the summit conference, Malcolm dined in the Hilton's main restaurant. Shortly after dinner, Malcolm collapsed in his hotel room, suffering from severe abdominal pains. He was rushed to a hospital. In an interview with the author, Milton Henry reported that he would have died if he hadn't been able to get to the hospital in a hurry. His stomach was pumped out, cleaned out thoroughly, and that saved him. But as Malcolm said afterwards, he would have died if he had not got immediate treatment. Analysis of the stomach pumping disclosed a quote-unquote toxic substance. Its nature was undisclosed, but food poisoning was ruled out. Malcolm was hospitalized for a day and a half, but against his doctor's advice, he managed to appear at the summit conference and give a speech. He was shaky for several days afterward. According to Henry, Malcolm believed that someone had deliberately poisoned me. Malcolm tried to find the waiter who had served him, but he had disappeared. In discussing the incident with Henry, Malcolm stressed, quote, the fact that CIA men were all around him in Cairo, unquote. He later told Henry that Washington had a lot to do with it. In an interview with this author, Mrs. Ella Collins, Malcolm's sister, reported that Malcolm told her of the poisoning incident on his return from Africa. He told me that he felt that the CIA was definitely responsible for it. After that, he was very careful. In fact, on another occasion, there was an affair given in his honor in Addis Ababa, and in observing the waiter, he got a leery feeling and refused the food. He never had any proof, of course, but he always felt sure somehow that he had bypassed another poisoning. Malcolm's poisoning in Cairo was a failure in more ways than one. His speech won tumultuous applause, and shortly afterwards, the delegates adopted a resolution condemning U.S. racial policies. No formal stand was taken on bringing the question before the United Nations, but Malcolm received private pledges of support for the plan from several nations.
Now, June 1964, while Malcolm is globetrotting and finding and obtaining connections for what he wanted to do, the Nation of Islam was kicking him out of his house. The house in Queens belonged to the Nation of Islam, but it was a part of a perk that he enjoyed, obviously, and they were filing for eviction of him and his family of 4 girls, and later on his wife, who was pregnant with twins when they assassinated him. The deed. As seen with the assassinations of the 1960s, patsies were always, and I must stress, always, fundamental to the execution of the deed. These three dudes come to mind and do not need introduction. The Malcom X affair was no different. Two key patsies were actually sentenced to life and went to jail for over 20 years as punishment for what they allegedly did. A third suspect, one Thomas Hagen, was found guilty, and in the government's haste to convict, it appears that both patsies were measured using the same evidence that convicted Hagen. And here we have, these gentlemen were Malcolm X's former driver and bodyguard, Thomas 15X Johnson, and Norman 3X Butler. Johnson's Islamic name was Khalil Islam, and Norman 3X Butler, Muhammad Aziz, from the NOI Mosque number 7 in Harlem, which happened to be the one led by Minister Malcolm X. Both were lieutenants in Mosque number 7, and that was in Harlem. In the case of Thomas Hagen, also known as Talmadge Hayer, William Kunstler, the famous civil rights attorney, took up his case in the 1970s to try to reopen the Malcolm X investigation, even petitioning Congress to do so based on a key affidavit he was able to obtain from Hagen. In this affidavit, he very briefly laid out the entire operation, naming the other four co-conspirators, Benjamin Thomas, Leon Davis, William X. Bradley, whom we will talk about extensively, and Wilbur McKinley. All from the Newark Mosque number 27. In his affidavit, he declares his motive for assassinating Malcolm X, which was hypocrisy. The first underline here, and this is a copy of his affidavit, by the following year, Malcolm X was declared a hypocrite by the Nation of Islam. Then he goes, I was told that Muslims should be more or less willing to fight against hypocrites, and I agreed with that. There's a good motive, huh? The Sunday afternoon meeting at the Audubon was an OAAU affair, which meant that the usual NOI crowd would not be present. Rather, a more heterogeneous mix of people from different walks of life. Sunday, 21st of February, 1965. Here is a view from behind the rostrum. Okay. Now, information presented here about what actually happened at the Audubon has previously been covered by Omar Shabazz in his three-part trilogy, The Black Zapruder Trilogy, The Murder of Malcolm X, a very well-researched and presented video analysis which introduces actual models of the second-floor grand ballroom as it was on the day of the assassination. And we will see those extensively here. The reference to Zapruder is noted as another parallel between the JFK Malcolm X assassinations, which notes the similarity where both cases contain famous film footage that for decades has been studied frame by frame. The following are model representations showing inside the Audubon Grand Ballroom as it was at the time of the assassination. So, Omar Shabazz, Audubon Grand Ballroom, mock-up right up to the moment of the assassination. We get different angles here, a side view. There's an overhead. And here's a frontal overhead, okay? And you see all those empty chairs behind him? We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Shotgun Man. An important revelation in recent times has been the identification of Al-Mustafa Shabazz, previously known as William X. Bradley of Newark Mosque number 27, as a so-called shotgun man who executed Malcolm X with a point-blank shotgun blast to the chest. As recently as 2018, the Newark Muslim African-American community lived in fear of speaking about Bradley, some even commenting that he was protected by the state until his death in 2018, where his involvement was a well-kept secret. The following image is a composite representation of Shotgun Man by Omar Shabazz, captured from his video mentioned above. And this is a description of Shotgun Man from this FBI document dated 2/22 the next day, 1965, and page 6 of the same FBI teletype describes Shotgun Man in astonishing detail, underlined in red. He is a Negro male, age 28, 6 feet 2, 200 pounds, heavy build, dark complexion, wearing a gray coat, and believed to be the assailant who used the shotgun. Well, guess what? There he is on the right. You see the red arrow? This image from the actual historical film shows Bradley exactly as described in the previous slide. Outside the Audubon in the scuffle with police and Malcolm X supporters as he tries to come to the aid of his partner in crime, Thomas Hagen, who had been shot in the leg by Malcolm X bodyguard Reuben Francis. The Black Zapruder film. They killed Malcolm X. There were a total of 4 films taken outside the Audubon that day. Only one survives. And these are some very cleverly designed from the model, okay? And this shows what was going on outside the Audubon in the immediate aftermath of the assassination, okay? Here, we got a close-up of what's going on. That's Hagen, you know, on the sidewalk there. And the guy that you see who has that white, it's like a newspaper, that's William X. Bradley, and you can see exactly the way as he has been described in the FBI report and by witnesses who were there. Now, the markers here, William X. Bradley is in yellow, Thomas Hagen is in green, Sergeant Alvin Aronoff is in blue, and Malcolm's supporter you will see in purple, okay? And this is what is known as the Black Zapruder film. And this is exactly what happened outside of the Audubon when Malcolm X was assassinated. And we're going to break it down frame by frame and show you exactly what was going on here, because this is exactly the moment where William X. Bradley escapes from the Audubon and escapes from history completely. Okay, let's break the film down. The following are stills of the video just presented, which show shotgun man William X. Bradley outside the Audubon in confrontation with the NYPD, shortly after the assassination, where he's throwing haymakers trying to help Thomas Hagen get away. Key frames in this sequence show how the NYPD allowed Bradley to escape. Again, Bradley's in yellow, Hagen in green, the policemen are in blue, and Malcolm's supporter in purple. This is, according to Omar, Sergeant Alvin Aronoff happened, quote unquote, happened to drive by the Audubon at the precise moment Thomas Hagen was being beaten outside by a mob of Malcolm X supporters and immediately took charge of the situation. Okay, at this point, both Bradley in yellow and Hagen in green are surrounded and appear to be in the grasp of NYPD officers and Malcolm supporters. Okay, go on to the next one. Want me to go back? Here. Okay, this is where the action is. William X. Bradley finds himself trapped and comes straight at Aronoff. Aronoff is on the right, okay? That pentagram there, okay? In this frame, they appear to line up eyeball to eyeball. If you look here at this frame and you see yellow and blue there, they're looking at right at each other, okay? Bradley makes his move. Here, he says, I'm out of here. Bradley nearly topples Aronoff as he plows into him like a fullback. Coach Denton, Coach Quinlan. You'll probably look at this guy's form, you know, you might be able to recruit this guy. Aronoff's face becomes contorted as he clearly reacts to Bradley bowling him over as one of Malcolm X's supporters in purple gives chase. Staying low, Bradley finds the hole and breaks away from Aronoff. We're in football season. All right? As Bradley gets away, an NYPD officer in blue creeps up on Malcolm's supporter who is giving chase in purple. And on the right, the one in yellow, that's William X. Bradley, shotgun man, who is disappearing from the viewfinder. Malcolm's supporter in purple, who is chasing Bradley, now gets clipped from behind and is restrained by one of NYPD's finest. How's this for an illegal block in the back? Oh, that's right. That's what it was. Bradley straightens his overcoat, crosses in front of the camera, and calmly walks away, folded newspaper still in his pocket. Meanwhile, Officer Aronoff draws his gun, fires a shot, and yells in the direction of Bradley, who has already left the scene. And Casey and I were looking at this. It looks like he's saying, hold it, you know? Hold it. He shoots, And then he gives up on Bradley, turns around, turns his attention towards Hagen, who has finally been restrained by the NYPD officers on the pavement. Sergeant Aronoff stays with his prize all the way to the hospital. All right. We almost didn't get it done, huh? Okay. And there we are. And there's a lot more. There is a lot more to come, so stay tuned.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. Go ahead and get up, stretch your legs, get a drink of water, wash your face, get some coffee, whatever you need. But be back in 5 minutes. We'll begin with part 2. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and begin with part 2, Larry Rivera, Malcolm X.
All right, this is the second part of this presentation, and there are a lot of slides, so we need to get started. Today is the 18th of November, okay? Exactly a year ago today, we were getting this. Exoneration is bittersweet for men cleared in Malcolm X's murder. And we're talking here of Norman 3X Butler, who we mentioned before was one of Malcolm X's lieutenants, and Thomas 15X Johnson, who were the two men, the patsies that I talked about earlier, who went to jail for 20 years, along with Thomas Hagen, for the murder of Malcolm X. Now, the city of New York paid this guy millions of dollars recently as compensation for all this suffering, for being in jail for 20 years, and for supposedly having been railroaded in the Malcolm X assassination case. All right. And some authors say not so fast. Author Carl Evans affirms that Norman 3X Butler, also known as Muhammad Aziz, was present at the Audubon during the Malcolm X assassination. And he points to the fedora that he was wearing. He says by wearing his fedora in an awkward 45-degree angle, Butler unknowingly made it easy to identify him in the crowd outside the Audubon ballroom. Still frames show him straining to view Malcolm X's body. The herringbone coat also sealed his fate. Now, if you look at some of these are all outside the Audubon. Okay, all these images, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, are outside the Audubon. Okay, now, when you compare that to when he went the next day, he was arrested, and they booked him on the Malcolm X case. And as you can see, he's wearing the exact same attire. The only thing he's changed is his undershirt there, but the same fedora and the same coat. Now, the question of Norman 3X Butler, researcher Omar Shabazz also believes Butler was indeed at the Audubon that afternoon. And he cites these two images, okay, right here and here. Here at the scene of the crime and here at the NYPD. Compare his dress to Butler's when he was arrested. Okay, notice the dark clothing under his coat. But as you can see, the coat and the fedora are exactly the same, and the individual as well. Okay, and there he is, Norman 3X Butler. They just paid this guy millions of dollars for his hardship. Immediately after the assassination, the trail led straight to Newark. In reply to a request from the FBI in New York, the FBI office in Newark sent the following communication to J. Edgar Hoover at FBI headquarters on 1 March 1965. That's 10 days after the assassination. Enclosed were the names of 10 members of Newark's Moss 25's most notorious NOI strong-armed men who had been engaged in acts of violence. We're talking about the Moss, Newark Moss number 25. The document included photographs of the 10 individuals, which suggest that the FBI had extensive and complete dossiers on each one of them. Note the extensive redactions. Yeah. Here, as you can see, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. A lot more information here. And these are the guys, and they knew who they were. And The ones that were out at the Audubon were mentioned in this communication. The 5 assassins, all from Newark Mosque number 25, from Baba Kondo conspiracy, I'll go over this very quickly, Benjamin Thomas, Leon Davis, Talmadge Hayer, who is Thomas Hagen, he had an alias, William Bradley, Shotgun Man, who we just talked about, and we will continue to talk about, all right? And this is him later on. In fact, he was a political contributor to the senator from Newark, Cory Booker, exactly, right? And he was seen in commercials, doing political commercials, handshaking with Cory Booker in at least one of those. Wilbur McKinley, okay? And here's William X. Bradley, al-Mustafa Shabazz, in 2018, where he confesses on his deathbed his involvement in the Malcolm X assassination. And you can find that at that reference at YouTube there at the bottom. Parallels to JFK, of course. Many parallels exist between the JFK and Malcolm X cases, to wit. Security stripping, of course. Perhaps the most glaring coincidence between the two. On 22 November 1963, the motorcycle escort order was altered at Love Field. The bubble top was removed. Moreover, a film taken of the limo leaving Love Field shows Secret Service agent Henry Ripka, right? We've seen that one, being called off of the running board of the Lincoln by Emory Roberts, much to the chagrin of Ripka, who raises his arms and hands in protest, you've seen that one, and disgust, visibly upset at the order. In the case of Malcolm X, NYPD policemen were completely absent before the assassination and suddenly appeared en masse after Malcolm was confirmed dead. Patsies, which we mentioned earlier. Someone had to be blamed or either locked up or shut up. As mentioned earlier, Butler and Johnson were patsies in the case of Malcolm X and Lee Oswald in the JFK assassination. Forewarning of the event. For JFK, it was Miami and Chicago. Motorcades were canceled at the 11th hour. In fact, one of them, the one in Chicago, because of an informant by the name of Lee, said, hey, call it off. And that's what happened. Okay. For Malcolm, among the confrontations, all right? For example, before the firebombing of his house, when he went to LA to see the attorney for the girls, Attorney Root, he found John Ali, who was Elijah Muhammad's top lieutenant in the hotel where he was staying, wondering how the hell did he find out that I was coming to LA. So what happens, you know, they started to chase him as he tried to make his way to the airport. He had to pick up a cane and make believe like he had a rifle and he was going to shoot them, and that was the only way that they were able to shake them off. When he finally gets to the airport, you know, he has to call security and they have to escort him and even change the gate, because they thought he was under enough of a premonition that they were going to assassinate him that they had to take those measures. So this is the firebombing. Oh, and before I continue, among the many confrontations, the firebombing of his house in Queens at 3 in the morning with his family inside, including 4 very young girls, 1 week before his assassination, takes the cake. Believe it or not, as we will soon see, New York Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin was present at the Audubon, having been tipped off by the NYPD that something was going to happen to Malcolm that afternoon. Now, you get your house is firebombed, you can't live in it, you're living on the street, and your next appearance at the Audubon, you would think that the police would be there en masse, but they were not, especially after having his house firebombed like that. And this is what Malcolm went through that day, 1 week before the assassination, reeking of soot from the 3 a.m. bombing of his home and wearing nothing but the clothes on his back. Malcolm boarded a plane to Detroit the next morning to deliver a speech at the Ford Auditorium in downtown Detroit. These are images of his house after the firebombing. And of course, Malcolm X story, Muslim prophet, ordered the bombing. Again, Mal, this is where we're starting to get all these stories that are pushing the NOI to the top of the list of those entities that wanted Malcolm X dead. Going on with parallels. None of Malcolm X's special guests who were supposed to share the stage with him showed up that day. Prominent among those, the militant Reverend Milton Galamison, okay, after Benjamin Goodman spoke, he introduced Malcolm before a row of ominous-looking empty chairs, suggesting those who were no-shows might have had foreknowledge of the assassination. JFK had been warned about going to Texas and even acknowledged to his wife Jackie the day before that they were now in nut country, with the Welcome Mr. Kennedy poster shown earlier as clear evidence of the intense and blatant hatred Dallas had for JFK. Diversionary tactics before the assassinations. We're talking about parallels. In the case of JFK, firecrackers, cherry bombs, and streamers were thrown at the top of Elm Street. In the case of Malcolm X, a pickpocket incident which touched off the assassination. And it says, N-word, get your hands out of my pockets. Plus a homemade smoke bomb that was detonated inside the ballroom at that precise moment. Hagen's prints were supposedly found on the device. Now, both investigations were fully controlled by the FBI. Former agent Arthur Fulton has revealed that 9 FBI operatives were present during the assassination, with William X. Bradley, a possible FBI operative as well. As in the JFK assassination, the FBI controlled everything, and their investigations were designed to funnel the blame onto the patsies: Butler and Johnson and Malcolm X, Lee Oswald, and the JFK. Now, this is very important. We have to look at this for a second here. Newark citizens wanted Malcolm X's case reopened in 1980, the William J. Hughes petition. 29 May 1980, New Jersey Congressman William Hughes, reacting to pressure from his constituents, we'll see who they were, sent a letter to then FBI Director William H. Webster asking to reopen the Malcolm X assassination investigation. The letter cited new evidence that had come to light, which the petitioners were willing to divulge, presumably in a formal setting. These letters including the FBI, were found buried in the FBI digital vault, which keeps copies of heavily redacted Malcolm X documents covering virtually his entire public life up until his assassination and beyond, including coverage of the trial, which sent those 3 NOI members to jail. Now, Congressman Hughes was all the way down in Atlantic City in the 2nd Congressional District. Newark was in the 10th Congressional District up here, okay, here, and there's Newark. So Hughes had nothing to do with these citizens. The one who should have been presenting this and who they should have gone to should have been Peter Rodino, of Watergate fame, all right? He was in the Congress for 40 years, one of the longest serving congressmen. Did he flat out refuse to petition, to carry this petition to the FBI? What happened? Why wasn't it him? All right. According to the petition, new evidence has come to light which identifies all the persons involved in the assassination and exonerates 2 of the 3 men convicted of the crime. In consequence, my constituents urge a new investigation of the assassination. There is a copy of the actual document in red, the box. The petition laid out that those who signed it knew who all the assassins of Malcolm X were and wanted the full exoneration of Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson, who spent over 20 years in jail for the murder they allegedly did not commit. There was no ambiguity whatsoever in Hughes' letter and petition, which included individual statements. I would respectfully request that the FBI look into the statements made in the petition and inform me of its findings. Eventually, of course, it was learned that the following men were involved but never brought to justice: Benjamin Thomas, Leon Davis, William Shotgun Man Bradley, and Wilbur McKinley. It appears from Hughes' letter that the perpetrators were being offered on a silver platter. However, once the petition reached the FBI, the names of the petitioners were erased and redacted. The statements mentioned above are not included in the petition and appear to have been removed from the file. There is our petition. The reply by the FBI is even more ridiculous. It is absolutely nothing short of astounding, where it clearly ignores the main argument of Hughes' letter regarding the new evidence coming to light and offers this ridiculous statement. A review of records of the FBI, CRD, USDJ failed to reveal any information that the FBI has investigated or been requested to investigate: the assassination of Al-Haji Malik Sabah's Malcolm X. fails to reveal any information that the FBI has investigated or been requested to investigate. I'm not even going to comment on that one. Congressman Hughes was not asking for information that the FBI might have had. He was offering new information from people who knew the identity of the other 4 killers of Malcolm X. The FBI systematically put this one to bed by ignoring the main arguments of the petitioners. And believe it or not, this is, all right. So, up to 9 informants were present. Okay, these are samples of documents, FBI documents that I'm showing you there are probably millions, maybe, I don't know, of documents regarding Malcolm X. They even have a special repository on the internet for them, and it's just reams and reams and reams of documents about the case. Okay, this one is even more ridiculous. I don't know of anybody who has written about the Malcolm X case who would say there were 10 or 11 more gunshots 5 minutes later. This whole thing took 5 minutes. You know, in 5 minutes, Malcolm was already across the street in the hospital. All right, so this is some of the drivel that you can see in these documents from the FBI. As mentioned here, eventually it was learned that 9 FBI informants were present during the Malcolm X assassination, per retired agent Arthur Fulton. The film evidence also appears to indicate that shotgun man William X. Bradley, Al-Mustafa Shabazz, of Newark Boss number 25, more than likely was a government operative, possibly even a bossy agent, who was allowed to escape the premises of the Audubon and appears to have been protected by the state throughout his life. Finally, Congressman Rodino's apparent refusal to go to bat for his Newark constituents adds another layer of mystery to the Malcolm X assassination. We're going to see another person who was involved in the Watergate very shortly. So you got 2 different strands of Watergate that cross over to Malcolm X. Traitors and informants, BOSSI, the Bureau of Special Services Investigations. Marable writes, even within the NYPD itself, BOSSI operated largely above the law, shielding its own operatives and paid informants from the rest of the police force. That's their badge. Omar Shabazz describes BOSSI as an elite group of New York's own little private FBI and CIA combined into one entity. Eugene Roberts, NYPD undercover cop, who working for BOSSI or Boss, fresh out of the Navy at a very young age, he became Malcolm X's personal bodyguard. Omar Shabazz identifies Tony Ulasewicz as the puppet master who recruited Eugene Roberts and was hell-bent on destroying Malcolm and his organization, directing Roberts to infiltrate and report to Malcolm X.
A few days after Malcolm X's press conference announcing his split from the NOI, William C. Sullivan of the FBI contacted the directors of BOSSI and asked them to recruit several African Americans to infiltrate Malcolm X's new organization. Among the directors at the time were 2 men who later would play key roles in the scandal that led to Richard Nixon's resignation: Anthony Ulasewicz, the infamous bagman of Watergate, and Nixon advisor John C. Caulfield. Ulasewicz was all too happy to comply with Sullivan's request. Malcolm X had been a thorn in the New York Police Department's side for more than a decade. He told Sullivan that he would have officers ready to infiltrate Malcolm X's new organizations within 30 days. While Sullivan was coordinating the domestic counterintelligence program against Malcolm X with BOSSI, the CIA initiated a similar program to determine the extent of Malcolm X's influence with Third World leaders. What do we have on Malcolm X? A CIA official wrote in an inter-office memo dated March the 10th. The request for information had come from the U.S. State Department. The official ordered a clerk to run a thorough check in the CIA's database to determine which Third World countries seemed receptive to Malcolm X.
Now, Eugene Roberts, his code name was Adam. His first assignment was to infiltrate the MMI, Muslim Mosque Incorporated. He was given a cover job as a clothing salesman in the Bronx by the BOSSI. By late 1964, Roberts had become an integral member of the MMI security team, standing guard at public events as one of Malcolm X's bodyguards. He told Dan Rather in 1975 about a dry run that he witnessed the week before the assassination and what he did with the information.
Police department. Your job was to gather intelligence, to gather information.
Yes.
And the Bureau's mission was to keep tabs on potentially violent people?
Yes.
Why was Malcolm X considered a potentially violent, if not in fact violent person?
Well, I guess at that point in time, society wasn't ready for Malcolm X. He was saying a lot of things that society didn't want to hear at that point in time. The week before he was killed, there was a meeting at the Audubon. And I saw what I thought, and I still think, was a dress rehearsal for Malcolm's impending assassination. I called the department the following morning, and I told them that I felt that this was a, as I put it, a dry run. And they told me that, okay, we'll pass it on and we'd take care of it. What they did with it, I really don't know.
He told everybody about this except Malcolm X. All right, had he been doing his job as a bodyguard and told Malcolm X, hey, you know, you better call this one off, you know, nothing of that, none of that would have happened. All right, so, oops, which one is what? All right. Here, Eugene Roberts looks into the camera while Malcolm X confidant, Leon 4X Amir, there's Amir here, that's him, and here's Roberts. Okay, it looks on. Amir himself would be dead within 3 weeks after calling out the government in the murder of Malcolm X. According to Marable, right before the assassination, Roberts moved to the back of the ballroom. By doing so, whether by coincidence or design, he would escape being near the primary line of fire that ensued seconds later. Here's where Omar Shabazz has him in his Audubon ballroom model here, way in the back. In the rear with the gear. In 1978, Norden published an updated version of his article in the December issue of Hustler magazine, published by Larry Flint, where he was more specific about Ulasewicz and Bossie. Almost 14 years after the murder, Roberts' role was discussed by none other than Watergate bagman and Nixon dirty tricks expert Anthony Tony U. Ulasewicz, who in 1965 was a top operative in Boss. I had guys everywhere, Ulasewicz revealed. You know that Life magazine picture of the Malcolm X assassination? Well, the black who was giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation was my plant. That's the way we did it in those days. We infiltrated from the Audubon ballroom to Watergate. Undercover cop and bossy operative Eugene Roberts attempts to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a moribund Malcolm X. And that's the way Life magazine printed it back in 1965. How callous was this? Did you ever see, you know, this type of goriness in a magazine which was read by families? You know, this is disgusting to me that Life magazine would do something like that. Yeah, I've got to still talk more about this guy. Eugene Roberts, there's his Organization of Afro-American Unity membership card signed by Malcolm X himself. According to Norden, Roberts would successfully maintain his cover and go on to infiltrate the Black Panthers and testify against them in 1970. Wow. Reuben Francis, he was Malcolm X's bodyguard, the only one. He was engaged in a firefight with these guys that were assassinating Malcolm X. He's the only one who took action, and he started to shoot away, you know, and he emptied his gun. And he's credited with shooting Thomas Hagen in the leg, and charges were brought against him. He jumped bail and disappeared for almost a year, and upon his return was held incommunicado by the authorities. Omar Shabaz's rendering of positions of Reuben Francis and Yuri Kachiyama, who we'll talk about briefly. Brother Reuben didn't get the memo. Notes on Malcolm X's assassination. Enter Brother Reuben Francis, a fearless Enter Brother Reuben Francis, a fearless soldier in the Nation of Islam who left and joined Malcolm X. Brother Reuben, on his own intuition, carried on that fateful day. And when shots rang out, taking Malcolm X's life, Brother Reuben exchanged fire with the assailants, hitting one Talmadge Hayer, that's Thomas Hagen. It is only a consequence of that exchange between Hayer and Reuben that Hayer was ultimately captured and brought to justice. Remember that scuffle outside the Audubon? New York Police Department uniform officers were not in any position to stop anything, as Roberts had anticipated. They were stationed in retreat positions away from the ballroom when the incident took place. If there were any other undercover operatives on hand, they did nothing at all to prevent the killing or challenge the assailants. So what is important to realize here is that had it not been for Brother Reuben popping Hayer, the NYPD appears to be complicit in not only letting the assassination happen, but also allowing every participant to get away scot-free. Statue of Liberty plot, I'm going to go over this briefly, because it is important. And we introduced Ray Wood, also an agent provocateur working for Bossie, and working on the Malcolm X case by trying to divert his security detail. And this is new information that came out in 2021 because upon his death, he left a letter, which we're going to see in a second, detailing what he was doing, working undercover as a provocateur and luring these people who had worked security for Malcolm away so that they would be in jail at the time of the assassination and affect Malcolm's security at the Audubon that day. Washington Post. Ray Wood was a tall, broad-shouldered Air Force veteran in his early 30s when he joined the detective division of the New York Police Department in 1964. He was immediately put to work as part of a cadre of black undercover law enforcement officers who were used to gain entry into the inner workings of civil rights groups. These police officers have been alternately described through the decades as heroes uncovering dangerous black militant plots, traitors undermining the cause of black equality, or simply black men taking advantage of opportunities during an era when well-paid employment was far scarcer for black people. The men, including Wood, were assigned by the NYPD's Bureau of Special Services, Bossie. The agency shared information with the FBI to undermine and discredit black civil rights leaders. Bossie preferred men with military training and intentionally did not send them to the police academy so they would be less likely to use police slang or exhibit other telltale behaviors, said David Viola, an adjunct history professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, who has researched Wood's role in the Statue of Liberty plot. Perhaps the most well-known among them, black undercover Bossie agent Gene Roberts, who we just presented, home from the Navy, infiltrated Malcolm X's security team, embodying the tensions of his role in that era. Roberts administered mouth-to-mouth to the leader as he lay dying on the Audubon. Here's the letter that he left behind, and I'm just going to zero in briefly here on 3 passages where he goes. April 17, 1964, I was hired by the New York City Police Department. Without training, I was immediately assigned to the Bossie Investigation Unit. My job was to infiltrate civil rights organizations throughout New York City to find evidence of criminal activity so the FBI could discredit and arrest its leaders. The Statue of Liberty bombing idea was created by my supervisor, Handler. Using surveillance, the agency learned that Bo and Syed, okay, the 2 of the men that were arrested, were key players in Malcolm X's crowd control security detail. It was my assignment to draw the men into a felonious federal crime so they could be arrested by the FBI and kept away from managing Malcolm X's ballroom security on February 21st, 1965. On February 16, 1965, the Statue of Liberty plot was carried out, and the men were arrested just days before the assassination of Malcolm. At that time, I was not aware that Malcolm was a target. On February 21st, 1965, I was ordered to be at the Audubon, where I was identified by witnesses leaving the scene. Thomas Johnson, the patsy who went to jail, was later arrested and wrongfully convicted to protect my cover and the secrets of the FBI and the NYPD. Okay, the arrest of Khalil Syed and Walter Bowe for the Statue of Liberty plot. These guys were supposed to be an integral part of Malcolm X's security, a notion that was completely debunked by Bowe himself in an interview with Omar Shabazz in 2021. The conspiracy angle being that they were pulled away from protecting Malcolm X so they could go place bombs in Lady Liberty's torch and crown. Not an easy task. Video shows rookie cop Wood receiving a commendation and promotion to detective for his work on the Statue of Liberty plot, which he instigated as an undercover bossy agent. Comically, his head is turned away from the cameras to hide his face, as described by the narrator of the film, so that he does not get burned and remains available for future undercover work. There's receiving an award. Now, his cousin, second cousin, Reggie Wood, wrote a book. And in that book, he writes, Ray Wood was awakened on 21 February 1965 by a phone call. A man on the other end of the line instructed him to leave and get in the back seat of a black Buick. Inside were two white FBI agents. The men told Wood to go to the Audubon to observe and report back about Malcolm's afternoon appearance. After balking at first, his cover had been blown after all, Wood chose a seat in the front of the room near the stage, according to Reggie. Amid the pandemonium, Reggie asserted in his book, a stunned Ray Wood was handcuffed and hurried away from the scene by the NYPD. Yuri Kachiyama, she's a Japanese-American activist who lived in Harlem and was very good friends with Malcolm X. Relationship was such that Malcolm would send her postcards from wherever he was during his travels. Yuri was at the Audubon on 21 February 1965 and witnessed everything that happened there. I have to bring her in here because she's going to talk about Ray Wood in a second. These are postcards sent from Malcolm from different countries, and these were all addressed to Yuri Kachiyama, mailed in 1964 to his good friend Yuri Kachiyama, and sent from Tanganyika, Cairo, and the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And there she is trying to help. Malcolm at this point is probably dead already, and here she is trying to come and assist Malcolm in any way that she could. So she wrote this. Ray Woods is said to have been seen also running out of the Audubon. He was one of the two picked up by police. He was the second person running out. Jimmy Breslin, New York Herald Tribune columnist, was at the Audubon on 21 February 1965. From Toby Rogers' book, okay, in the book's introduction, Rogers writes that when he interviewed Breslin 10 years ago on the 40th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, Breslin told him, well, I was supposed to receive a journalism award in Syracuse that evening, but I got a tip from the NYPD that I should go up to Harlem and see Malcolm X speak. I sat in the back, way in the back, smoking a Pall Mall. That's right. And as you can see, the distance to Syracuse, and who would be driving up to Syracuse in the middle of February, you know, with 20 below. Okay. Breslin position in the ballroom, right there. Okay. Now, Breslin wrote about police rescuing two suspects immediately after the assassination. Okay. And another point of this cover of the New York Herald Tribune, where you have to look at the subheading, the subheadlines. The feud that led to death, which pushes the NOI to the top of the list of suspects to blame for the assassination. And this one, chickens coming home to roost, never did make me sad, they've always made me glad, which is obviously used in a mocking, disrespectful, derisive, and callous manner. Now we go from two suspects to one suspect in the next edition, in the next city edition of the New York Herald Tribune. And all of a sudden, now there's one suspect. All right. Thomas Hoy arrested a suspect, but inside the Audubon. Okay? And here we go. Said he had been stationed outside the 166th Street entrance when I heard the shooting and the place exploded. He rushed in, saw Malcolm lying on the stage, and grabbed the man. Oops, saw Malcolm on the stage, and grabbed the suspect who he said some people were chasing. As I brought him to the front of the ballroom, the crowd began beating me and the suspect. Patrolman Hoy said he put this man, not otherwise identified later for newsmen, into a police car to be taken to the Wadsworth Avenue station. And all these articles are raising the issue of what I just talked about, the 2 suspects, which was trimmed down to 1. And in a second, we're going to see that it actually goes, it should have been 3.
The New York Times reported on December the 6th, 1965, that, quote, most of Malcolm's admirers appeared to believe that he was murdered on orders from the United States government, unquote. An unidentified Harlem woman interviewed by New York Post reporter Thomas Skinner the day after the assassination summed up the suspicions of many Negroes. Quote, I don't care if he was shot by Negroes. This was planned, directed, and carried out on orders from the white power structure, unquote. Even such a pillar of civil rights establishment as Corps National Director James Farmer expresses doubts of the official version of the assassination. On February the 24th, 1965, the New York Times reported Farmer's belief that, quote, the killing of Malcolm X was a political act with international implications and not necessarily connected with black nationalism, unquote. In a more recent interview with this author, Farmer added that, quote, the week prior to his death, Malcolm tried to get in touch with the State Department to demand protection. Now, Malcolm was no fool. If this was a simple thing with Muslims, he would not wire the State Department.
Now, Farmer revealed that after the assassination, I spoke to the White House and to officials in the Department of Justice requesting a federal inquiry into the murder. I've heard nothing from them on it. And here's the article that tells us James Shabazz was the leader of the Newark Mosque number 25, and he was in a adjacent room, holding room to the stage, if you can see here. And he is suspected of being an agent also, okay? A double agent, according to Shabazz. Many organization members felt Shabazz was a double agent. Now, obviously, his men were the ones who were responsible for the assassination, so that sort of gets you thinking. Circumstantial evidence indeed appears to point to a political assassination by the U.S., not an execution by a nation of Islam over envy, hypocrisy, paternity suits, or differences of dogma. Who were the men who followed Malcolm to the New York Hilton the night before the assassination and tried to gain access to his room? Who was the tight-lipped, olive-skinned man with ferret eyes whom Malcolm identified as having followed him from London to New York and who fits the description of one of the assassins? Why was Malcolm poisoned in Cairo the day before he was to deliver a scathing denunciation of the American government to the Summit Conference of African Prime Ministers? Was Malcolm barred from entering France a week before the assassination attempt, as one North African diplomat claims, because the Duxim Bureau of France knew the CIA planned his murder and didn't want him assassinated on French soil? And there it is. France didn't want him in France because they heard through the grapevine through the intelligence community that they were going to assassinate Malcolm in France. Leon Forex Amir had good reason to believe his life was in danger because of what he witnessed. Here he arrives at Malcolm's funeral escorted by 2 bodyguards. Okay, Leon Amir's position right there at the time of the assassination. And he's found dead in Boston. And why was Leon Forex Amir, Malcolm's New England representative, found strangled to death in his Boston hotel room? Hours after he had told a public meeting that he had evidence that the white power structure killed Malcolm. Poor Malcolm had already been beaten into a coma the previous Christmas day in the same hotel where he was living. According to Goldman, he lingered for 3 days in a hospital with broken ribs, popped eardrums, bloodied face, all courtesy of black Muslim goons who used the same martial arts techniques that Amir was an expert in and taught. On March 13, Amir delivered a scathing speech before the Boston Militant Labor Forum, a branch of Socialist Workers' Party. I have facts in my possession as to who really killed Malcolm X, he told a meeting. The killers are not from Chicago, they're from Washington. And as Carl Evans, you know, the same, he writes about Amir and how, you know, he was found dead in his hotel room and under extremely suspicious circumstances. Now, more questions from Norden that linger. Who were the two men wounded during the assassination? There were two men wounded. One was William Harris, and the other one was William Parker. And they have dropped out of sight as well. Who was the mystery man arrested outside the ballroom after the shooting? He was being beaten by a mob. This is the one that Officer Hoy arrested. Why did he disappear from sight immediately after being taken into custody, and why has he not been identified or heard from since? Okay. Now, the suspects arrested at the Audubon scorecard: Thomas Hagen, shot in the leg by Malcolm X bodyguard Reuben Francis. He limped to the second floor stairway, which leads down to the street, and exited sliding down the rail. He was arrested outside the Audubon after trying to get away, with Bradley coming to his aid, as shown in the Black Zapruder film. Ray Wood, who we just introduced, who was identified, handcuffed and led away by police. And the one that got away, Cuban or Puerto Rican looking suspect with ferret eyes, olive skin, and thin lips, wearing a turtleneck sweater, who was rescued and arrested by Patrolman Thomas Hoy inside the Audubon as he was being beaten by a mob of Malcolm X supporters. Why did the New York Police Department intimidate witnesses and suppress evidence to fit their own version of the murder? Why have several of Malcolm's bodyguards in possession of important information on the murder fled the country? Why has Reuben Francis, Malcolm's secretary, been arrested by the FBI and held incommunicado? Why does Malcolm's widow, Mrs. Betty Shabazz, claim that her husband knew it was an American power structure? It was the American power structure that was after his life. Why did Malcolm himself tell Alex Haley the day before the assassination that he no longer believed it was the Muslims who were planning his death, but something bigger? But there is no doubt that those within the CIA and the New York Police Department who arranged Malcolm's assassination did intend it, at least in part, as an object lesson to his followers. A lesson that American black men must never again seek for sources of power, alliance, and inspiration outside this country, must never look to socialism as a solution to their economic exploitation, must never attack the disease of the soul endemic in the American system that perpetuates the oppression and degradation of the Negro. Powerful forces, including the U.S. State Department and the CIA, had been deeply alarmed by Malcolm's growing impact, particularly his efforts to internationalize the American racial question by bringing it before the United Nations under the human rights provision of the UN Charter. It was not the Muslims who tapped Malcolm's phone, keeping him under 24-hour surveillance in the U.S., and followed him closely throughout his trips to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Finally, Eric Norden concludes, only one other force had the motive and the means to assassinate Malcolm: the intelligence apparatus of the United States government. Malcolm was a serious threat to American foreign policy objectives. His successes in Africa had severely damaged U.S. prestige, and if his plan to bring American racial problem into the UN came to fruition, Washington would become the whipping boy of world public opinion. The whole raison d'etre of such agencies as the CIA is to protect America against those countries and individuals which are viewed rightly or wrongly as enemies. Malcolm was an enemy. Now, one small addendum here that we've talked about Martin Luther King, and very few people know that Malcolm's work overseas was not being ignored by Martin Luther King. In fact, using emissaries, that went back and forth, talking instead of calling or writing or whatever, which would have been easy to intercept, they were planning on joining together at the UN to denounce this whole thing that Malcolm X had been bringing up and talking about in international circles, and that was something that was in the works at the time of Malcolm's assassination. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Rivera. Well, this presentation wasn't quite as easy to assimilate as his overlay work, but I think it's really important work, and I'm glad that we have an opportunity to go ahead and bring into our conference something that has not been previously researched or discussed. So it's going to have us an opportunity. We'll have DVDs later, I believe, and I know what I'm going to have to do is put it on pause and advance it a little bit and really absorb it, because there's a lot of information here.